welcome everybody to our Alaska Photographic Center Tuesday monthly meeting. Tonight is a slide talk with our guest photographer and filmmaker Bjorn Olson, and I will give him an intro here in a minute. But I first wanted to mention, hopefully all of you have gotten a card from us, or will be getting a card soon. Or can pick up a card for the Rarefied Light invitation call for entry, and there's all the information's on the back, but I'll just read it to you. Our juror this year for our annual juried show, photographic show, and our juror is Jennifer Spellman. This is her excellent image on the front cover. You can find out more information on our website at akphotocenter.org. But the call for entries is already open. It opened March 6th and it closes at 10 p.m. Alaska Standard Time on June 7th. So you've got, I don't know how many months that is, 2.5 months, something like that, to get your work in digitally. At callforentry.org. Jennifer is also doing a workshop. It's an online workshop on zine making and storytelling. It's a 3-day workshop, and it's I believe we still have spaces available, and you can get more information on that at akphotocenter.org. I don't have the dates in front of me right now, but yeah, all that's coming up. So I hope everybody participates. This year, the show is, I think it came back from Kenai and it's on its way to Valdez. We had openings in Anchorage and Fairbanks too. So it is a traveling show, and it's a great way for everybody to get their work seen in some places around the state. So with that, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Bjorn Olson. And Bjorn is his slide talk is called Photographing Alaska at Human Speed. Bjorn's a filmmaker, a photographer, a writer, an activist, and a wilderness adventurer. He was born in an abandoned trapper's cabin in the interior of Alaska. And has dedicated his life to exploring the far-flung corners of the state by human power and documenting his experiences. A lifelong closeness to Alaska's vast wilderness and its unique cultures has helped shape Bjorn's identity, his environmental activism, and excuse me, and the media he produces. He currently lives in Homer, Alaska. His website is MJOLNIR of Bjorn.com. If that didn't make any sense to you how I read it, I'm sorry. It's all on our website at AK Photo Center. So yeah, with that, Bjorn, we're glad to have you and interested to hear what you have to show. So
awesome. Thank you, Michael. Should I do the screen share now?
Yeah, whenever you're ready. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, Michael and the Photography Center, for having me. This is a cool opportunity I don't usually get to talk with other photographers. It's kind of a lonely world for me in Alaska. So, and this will be the first time that I've ever given this slideshow, and it's not, I don't know if it's all entirely fleshed out how it's going to go, but I figured, since it was an opportunity to talk to other, photographers or other people interested in photography, my usual routine with the slideshow is after a trip or some project that I've been working on, which has kind of a beginning, middle, end narrative arc. Whereas this one won't have that, because I wanted to share, a variety of pictures from all over the state, with the kind of the one theme mostly being that all of these photos were captured while we were underway on some human-powered expedition. And I chose this as the kind of the opening photo to kind of like give an idea of what our kit looks like, at least in the context of winter cycling. So I do a lot of winter cycling, big, long expeditions, summer fat bike, pack raft in conjunction expeditions, a lot of sea kayak expeditions, ski mountaineering kind of trips. But in general, this kind of, I'd say the majority of ground that I've covered in Alaska has been on the fat bike, and majority of that has been in winter. And you see like how everything really has to be pared down. We kind of go with an alpine style approach to, basically everything, but, definitely with the bikes, you want to be as light as possible. But carrying a camera is really important to me. So for the most part, of being a quote unquote photographer, I've carried mostly a DSLR, and then just recently switched to a mirrorless, full frame mirrorless camera. And so you can see, I don't know if my cursor will show, but on my back there, I have a custom, I sewed myself what I call it a Manny pack. And it's just an oversized single chamber fanny pack with big wide tooth zipper. And inside of it is a very durable dry bag. And I always keep my camera there. And I found that I really am very efficient with that. I can, like undo the belt and get the camera, get the pouch in front of me quickly to capture, sometimes these, neat occurrences happen, really fast. And then always having it in the dry bag has been, really is a really important thing, kind of regardless of, the season. And so, yeah, anyway, I thought I would just start with that to kind of like talk about the gear. And for the most part, I make the majority of my income these days filmmaking. But on trips, I'll sometimes decide ahead of time if I'm going to take the bother with the extra burden of trying to document to film some trip that we're on, then I'll often carry, besides the DSLR, well, the full frame camera, whether a DSLR or mirrorless. I usually bring the 24 to 105, just one lens, and then if I'm going to be trying to make any video recordings, I'll bring a shotgun mic and like a monopod, and the monopod doubles as our center pole for our sleeping shelter. So anyway, I thought I would just kind of get out some of the gear stuff out the gate. Let's see. Oh, here we go. So this is the little cabin that is an abandoned trapper's cabin outside of the village of Mentasta, where I was born. And my folks were, back to the land hippies. And not too long after, I think it was maybe even this winter, the BLM kicked us out, and we eventually moved down the road to a little village community called Solana, where we had a 5-acre homestead. And so I kind of grew up with this real closeness with Alaska, and this aesthetic has remained. Although I'm in Anchorage right now, actually at a hotel, but I still live in a dry cabin. I chop wood and haul water and do that.
Good for you.
But when I was 12, we moved to Valdez, and that had a pretty big impact on my life in a couple of ways. This slide I just wanted to show real quick, just to give kind of an idea. Is that color showing up? Can you guys see the pinkish red routes there?
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I'm always worried with people with color blindness, because I think the green and red is difficult for people, and I didn't think about that until after. So this is the kind of the current map of my wilderness adventures around Alaska. And so you'll be seeing photos once I get going here and stop talking from all over the place from Alaska. And the majority of these routes are fat bike routes, but a lot of sea kayaking routes on the coast. But so yeah, as I was saying, and we moved to Valdez when I was 12, and it had a pretty big impact on me to be exposed to people that were doing mountaineering, climbing, kayaking, and that, kind of set me down the path. And I actually even learned to develop black and white film then, but at that point, it didn't really stick. And so 20s, teens, 20s, 30s, I, did a lot of wilderness adventuring, but I didn't really get into photography until I met now dear friends, Hig and Aaron, who in 2007 walked and packrafted and skied from the Aleutians, or from Seattle to the Aleutians. And then they started a nonprofit called Ground Truth Trekking. And not too long after getting to know them, I had this burning desire to make a documentary film about this very underreported on open pit gold mine on the Kuskokwim River. And so I just loved their model of using wilderness adventures as an opportunity to learn about some region, especially the natural resource issues and the climate issues and the cultural issues. And then, using your expedition as a way to hopefully engage with an audience when you return. So we kind of always called it like the cheese and broccoli. You like lure your audience into the documentary or the slideshow, whatever you're giving, with colorful to elicit a bigger conversation. So I can read the kind of the mission statement here of Ground Truth Trekking, which is human-powered expeditions across Alaska give us the ground truth of everything from mine proposals to climate change through observation and conversation with locals. We combine this ground truth with research truth using their scientific backgrounds to create comprehensive and accurate articles on key issues around the state. So this model really has influenced me. And although, I've only done, a handful of projects directly with Ground Truth Trekking, the ethos, I think, remains throughout, any of my expeditions. And so what I figured I would do tonight is, rather than tell the story behind each photograph, I would just, share a few stories, a few kind of like few that stand out, and then the rest of the photos that kind of surround that photo / story are, just there to kind of show the kind of the, a breadth of photography. So I don't, like I mentioned, I don't really make much money directly as a photographer. Majority of my work comes from filmmaking and working with other nonprofits. But this photo has now become the cover of the second Wheels on Ice book. The original one was edited by Terrence Cole, and it was about 19th and early 20th century biking trips in Alaska, which surprisingly there were quite a few. And then now there's been a reissue of the 20th and 21st century. So I contributed a story, and then this photo they used for the cover of the book. So, certainly being out, in Alaska and on the trail it's just such a, if anybody, here has been, on the Iditarod or, any number of the really neat trails, there's just this almost an indescribable feeling, and a camaraderie and a closeness to the land, but also a real concern for one another's safety and well-being. And, there's just these subtle little things that you experience, when you're on, the trail, the winter trail in particular, that is just so remarkable. And the one that I just love reflecting on all the time is whenever you meet somebody on the trail, either, you coming together, doesn't matter if it's a snow machiner, a dog musher, another fat biker, a skier, whatever. It doesn't matter if it's 20, 30, 40 below. When you meet the person, everybody takes their glove off and shakes, a bare hand. And there's something really very genuine about that. And it kind of like speaks to the greater attitude of, the way people look out for one another. And I think that's a very ancient impulse that remains from colonial times. This is a picture of my partner biking out of Nome and one of the famous blowholes that the Nome mush or the Iditarod mushers just were experiencing again just a few days ago. So on the Iditarod, there was one trip. This is one of the stories that I kind of wanted to embellish about how, you just get to experience things that you wouldn't otherwise, know even existed, the generosity. So we had a very challenging ride coming from the Kuskokwim drainage over to the Yukon drainage. The trail was closing in on us. It was really cold. And when we got into the village of Ruby, we were, felt like salvation. Like finally, we're on the river and we're at a village. We can resupply on food and maybe, warm up. And the village felt abandoned. There was nobody out. There was no snow machines. It was, beautiful evening. But just nobody. So we, rode down, this it's kind of the steep hill down to the river. We didn't see anybody. And then we rode back up the hill and we were kind of riding all around the village. And finally, these two beautiful women pulled up on a snow machine and, kind of like, whoa, where'd you guys come from? And so we talked for a minute, but then they said, oh yeah, everybody is at the school. An elder has passed away and we're having a potluck and please come. They invited us to come. And so, we didn't say no. We went up and walked into this very, an emotionally raw moment for the whole community. They'd lost a beloved elder, but everybody immediately starts plying us with food. And of course, we're wind chapped and sunburnt, and they get us comfortable and they're plying us with food. And then one person after another would come up and tell us that the man who had died always took in travelers, that he was that he really cared for and looked out for people that had come off the river or off the trail. And it's just this a powerful moment for both of us on this long trip. We were ultimately biking all the way to Kotzebue, and for the rest of the way we just had this warmth, spirit with us that traveled from that moment on. Just some more images from the trails. The people that we rely on by far and away the most when we're out are the local hunters. Those are the people that travel the land the most often and have the most insight. And it's always such a joy when somebody pulls over, and they're usually very curious about us, especially when you get off the Iditarod. The Iditarod Trail has now there's a culture of cycling, but we've been exploring a lot of other winter trails where it's less common, and people are often quite confused when we show up, but then when we explain ourselves, they get it and understand. And they may think we're crazy, but they don't tell us that to our faces. This photo was actually published in a adventure cycling I think it was like a calendar or something like that. But I've always really enjoyed this photo. Kind of shows how, how sparse the trail can be sometimes, wind blown over, and, clearly it's really windy and got drifts, but, we often just keep going and it works. And experiencing, all the different, cultures around Alaska. It's so great, showing up to that to Ruby for that potluck was one beautiful experience, but it's happened in kind of many other circumstances, but kind of even regardless of whether or not something is happening in the community, it's always just so great to see the kids and have them come running out. And if any kid asks to ride the bike, absolutely, it's like if it can survive what we just put it through, they're certainly not going to hurt it. I love the opportunity to try to photograph portraits, and and I love nothing more than a portrait out in the world, out in the backcountry. And I just chose a few of my favorites here. This guy Bob Jones is a character. He's been snow machining the Iditarod Trail. I can't even remember how many times. He just loves the trail so much, and he brings his son-in-law, who's young and can kind of help him. He's got a bad hip and bad knee, but he took it upon himself to replace the bear battered Rainy Pass sign. And it was so neat because we were on the trail kind of leapfrogging. He would take his time, and we happened to show up right when he was installing this sign, and we got to have our picture, taken under the what is now the Rainy Pass sign. One of the other things that we really get to experience in Alaska is kind of the freshness of of colonization, and just how recent Alaska has undergone these kind of radical changes. So this is from an expedition that we did from Point Hope to Utqiagvik, formerly Barrow. And outside of the village of Wainwright, we'd actually seen several other sod hut complexes, but most of the ones we'd seen elsewhere were in greater decay. But this was a site outside of the village of Wainwright, and there were quite a few of these sod hut houses. And so we were still fairly near the village of Wainwright, but we had to stop and check this place out. It was just so neat, and there was many of these. It was a complex, little village site. And so while we were here admiring it, well, actually earlier we'd been passed by a four-wheeler heading out. And what we always find on those kind of wilderness trips, the summer ones, is that you leave a village, and as soon as you get to the first body of water where we have to blow up our pack raft to get across a channel or a river or a lagoon mouth, something like that, then the four-wheeler tracks end, and then we're into wilderness. So we had not reached that zone out of Wainwright yet. We were still where people could four-wheeler on the same beach that we were riding. And so while we were here admiring this site, that couple that had passed us, like an hour earlier, were on their way back. So in an hour, they had gone out, shot a caribou, and completely field dressed it, which, just blew my mind. It takes me so long to field dress a caribou. And these guys just kind of went and whipped it out. Actually, this is a husband and wife couple. And what was really fascinating is that we were right at that sod igloo complex. And as we were talking, he says, he points to that one that I just shared the photograph of, and he said that his great uncle lived in it, which just really, like I know how long it's been since Alaska has been colonized. It shouldn't be surprising to know that it's that young, but it's really only been 2 generations since people were living in sod huts. And I think that that's really fascinating, and it's begun to infuse its way into this kind of my philosophy of simplifying life being kind of one of the best solutions or remedies that we have at our disposal when addressing big issues like climate change and resource extraction. We're living on a biosphere that has supported humans for 4 million years, but it's only been in the last couple hundred that we've really started to go nuts. So I don't think that recipe for how humans have lived for the vast majority of time, for many people, it's just it's 2 generations ago. It's something I've been thinking about quite a bit. And this is another example of, coming into, this is the village of Point Lay. We happen to show up for their Nulakatak whaling festival, which is a, brilliant festival. It's the Thanksgiving of the North. And unfortunately their blanket was down. So they didn't get to do the blanket toss. And so these there are going to be 2 pictures here that are not taken from wilderness adventures, but I felt like I love this photo of this little boy Jojo. So these 2 pictures are of on Little Diomede. I've been working with the tribe for the last couple of years on a documentary film project about climate change and how it's impacting their way of life. And of any of the communities that I've been in Alaska, I think Diomede is the one that has kind of gone into the 21st century with the least amount of reliance on the supply chain. because they're so remote and so isolated, they really have maintained their subsistence culture. But it's been in the last decade, with the loss of sea ice, that there have been these radical changes to how often, how well they can harvest. And so, Diomede is this, very sheer, steep, rocky outcrop in the middle of the Bering Strait. And part of what makes it, well, it's a very resource-rich area. Obviously, the Bering Sea is very resource-rich. But what helps it make, a lot of sense as a place to live is that there's the sea ice platform to subsist off of. So hunting walrus, has gone from getting, 400 or 500 to support the village a year, now down to 4 or 5 a year. But the subsistence identity and culture is still really strong. It is this generation that is losing their ability, and it's not because of a lack of want. It's because the resources are, much more challenging to get without that sea ice. And so this is Umium Siluk. He's certainly one of the torchbearers on Diomede, carrying his dip net up into the blinds. They dip net the auklets out of the air with these nets. Interesting, amazing, thing to observe. Some of my own hunting trips in the Alaska range. This was one of the families that my dad, when he moved to Alaska, was working as a big game guide out in the Wrangell Mountains. This is Bill Ellis, one of the big game guides out in the Wrangells. Just kind of go through a few more of these. This is the boneyard in Point Hope or Tikigak. One of so oftentimes, we will ahead of time, when I say we, I mean my partner, my wife now. We've been together for 13 years, and over that time, she's been my #1 trip partner. And we'll often discuss, ahead of time, what kind of a project we're going to do, whether we're just going to try to move fast and, and then therefore I'm going to only take photos and not focus on any film video work. She's a nature journaler, so she always brings her nature journaling kit. But this trip that we're on here, this is it's closer to Point Hope, but we were traveling from Kotzebue to Point Hope. And one of the things we were most looking forward to on this trip was Cape Thompson. And I'm sure many of you have heard some of the stories about Project Chariot and this plan from the Atomic Energy Agency in the 50s to use nuclear bombs for peaceful purposes, for engineering purposes. And so they wanted to prove that they could make harbors with nuclear bombs. And they proposed the Ogotorok River Valley, which is where this photograph is from, as their demonstration site. And I'm sure I'm paraphrasing on their behalf, but they were choosing this spot because it it seemed like no problem to sacrifice it, because only a few native villages were anywhere near it. It's kind of writing these people off. But this valley is where people come hunt caribou, and kind of even regardless of that, like it's 30 miles away from the village is where they're going to blow up with nuclear bombs this area. And so thankfully these people, the people of Point Hope, really led the charge to get that project ceased. And yeah, so thankfully we got to experience it, and and it's awesome to see 70 years later that people are still utilizing it in in its traditional manner. But also on this trip, we had thought about ahead of time doing some citizen science while we were out. My partner has worked with the acronym is COAST, and it stands for Coastal Observation and Seabird Survey Team. And what she's done generally at home in Homer is these volunteers will have like a spot of coast, and they'll regularly go monitor it to see if there are seabird mortalities. So we figured, since we were traveling this long coastal route in the northwest of Alaska, where very few people make it, that we would go, we would try to document the seabirds as we were going, dead seabirds, if we saw any. And this was summer of 2019, which anybody that was here that summer can probably remember. That was like the hottest summer everywhere. It was the year that salmons were, belly up in all the, Bristol Bay, Norton Bay, all over the state. Salmon were dying from heat shock, and the ocean temperature was so high. So we ended up counting almost 1,000 dead seabirds on that route, which was, very sobering. But it was also, it was really useful data, too. It really helped with this, the statistics for this stuff, because, like I say, most people don't make it out into these far-flung places. And when they do, they'll be often traveling by skiff, and you just don't get to see, as up close as we do. When we're traveling along the coast at human speed, we would, undoubtedly see more than you would if you were just kind of going by in a skiff. This is Cape Thompson itself. We ended up having to wait several days at that Orgetorix Valley for the winds to come down. And there is an overland route, but we really wanted to see in the front of Cape Thompson, and it was absolutely worth the wait. This is one of the most spectacular places I've ever seen in Alaska. Would love to go back. And another reflection, of traveling all over Alaska is that, there are all these distinct cultures within Alaska that have their own language, their own, dances, their own traditions, their own, stories. But there's also a lot of commonality, how, where, and when, people go about harvesting. Often, we've reflected upon being invited into, potlucks or dinners, and, the swan soup recipe is, the same in Athabascan country as it is in Inupiat country. So it's really neat that there's this, kind of a melting pot of traditional ecological understandings and ways of doing things. So the last kind of story that I thought I would try to tell relates to sea kayaking. I've been captivated by sea kayaking since I was a kid in Valdez. Did my first trip when I was 12 or 13 out to Chute Glacier, and it just blew my mind. And so I started kind of getting into sea kayaking in my late teens. And early on, I was really inspired by the Greenlanders, because in Greenland, they recognized that, with the advent of motorboats, they were going to lose their traditional practice of kayaking, using the kayak to hunt. So what they decided to do as a nation is to turn it into the national sport, kind of similar to the Iditarod story, of recognizing that dog mushing is disappearing in Alaska. So if you make a sport, then the culture will remain. But in Greenland, they did that with sea kayaking, and it's been really successful. It is the national sport in Greenland. Second in line is soccer. And very early on, I was reading articles about this, the protege, this Greenlandic man named Maligiak Padilla, who was the kayak champion man of the year 10 times. And eventually he moved to Alaska. And so as soon as he moved here, I sought him out, because I've been trying to teach myself these Greenland roles and different, techniques, and just really inspired by it. And part of, moving to Alaska for him was to try to revitalize traditional kayaking in Alaska. And so he worked with the Bering Strait School District for many years, bringing kayak building. Unfortunately, he was never able to bring kayak skills, like the actual, skills of paddling, because of their kind of strict concern over safety. which is really unfortunate. It bothered him to no end. But then he would teach other workshops. And so a couple times I built kayaks with him, traditional Greenlandic style kayaks. And then, then did some guiding with him as well. And so this photograph is at Maligiak. We paddled out to Portage Glacier one October to go to practice our roles, as in as cold of water as we could find. That was the mission. But then one of the really neat things that kind of came about while I was with Maligiak is we guided a trip into the Kenai fjords with an international group of people, but one of the guys was Apiwak, or what? Well, at the time, guy was Apiwak Ratan, who is now the first Inupiaq trans woman to have had run the Iditarod, and she took to kayaking unlike anybody I've ever seen. I taught my wife how to kayak, and I really have always said to her that I thought that she was one of the most naturally gifted paddlers I've seen. But Apiwak was kind of almost on another level. Like, I taught him to roll, in like less than an hour. And on this trip with Maligiak and I, he would practice his rolls basically every night. And he had, within the course of that trip, at least a dozen different roles, including hand rolls. And it was just remarkable to see his aptitude, her aptitude for it. And so these last few photos that I'm going to share here aren't from wilderness trips. They're just from either work projects or just other fun things that I felt like I wanted to throw in. Not sure if you all heard about this Bristol Bay double ender that last summer sailed from Homer across the inlet, went over the portage, and then returned to its happy fishing grounds of Bristol Bay. So since the sailboat fishery closed, this was the first boat that's ever returned to the bay. And it was a part of a conservation effort being led by Tim Troll to get, I can't remember how many acres, but a vast tract of land on the eastern side of Lake Iliamna into a conservation easement with the tribe of Pijo Bay. And by doing that, the tribe makes money off their land because it's purchased for conservation, but then it also blocks the Pebble Mines northern route that was, in their original permit application. So regardless, like the EPA's decision to not grant or to have the 404C protections, like we saw last time, that had, there's politics can still be involved with that. But this is permanent. This project that Tim Troll worked on is permanent. And I feel like Tim Troll should, get the award of the year for his fantastic efforts. And this I really enjoyed this photo shoot during the pandemic. Our little town of Homer every winter does a Nutcracker fair, our performance, and it's a big deal in Homer. Like, it's really a big deal. And so the pandemic put a big kibosh on it. And so they did a socially distanced performance that I filmed, but then at one point we all went out to Gruink Glacier with the dancers and did this little photo shoot. Really enjoyed that. And I don't really photograph weddings, but I photographed a few weddings for friends on occasion. And these are my friends, Alana Hurley and Terry from Dillingham. And this was just such an honor. Alana is the tip of the spear with the United Tribes of Bristol Bay, who've been working tirelessly for over a decade in the fight against Pebble. And it was, you can't imagine the kind of the stress and the burden, that looming project has put on an entire region. And this wedding brought that whole region to their wedding. And it was so precious to see this moment in time when people could kind of let their hair down and, stop being so serious in the fight. And then I figured I would close with this last photograph of a mural in Dillingham, which I love the simple message of it. And that is my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you so much, Bjorn. Great work. It's really, really inspiring stuff.
Thank you.
It's good to see somebody out there seeing Alaska. You know, you can bring it back for us who maybe are too busy or whatever, for whatever reason, can't go.
It's a challenge even for us, you know, like we, you know, it's become, you know, it's typically it's March and June or July that we leave. We try to leave our schedules open so that we can get, you know, a big trip in. You know, we try to get 2 big trips in a year. But you know, having that flexibility within our lifestyle, you know, involves certain sacrifices, which, you know, aren't like, you know, enormous sacrifices, but, you know, it would be very challenging if you had a regular 9-to-5, which neither of us do. And so that comes with its drawbacks, but it also has its rewards. But it is something that we've prioritized, and we really have to be cautious with what we say yes to. Because, you know, the time does, you know, can just slip away from you.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a question, if I may.
Absolutely.
So hi, Bjorn. My name is Matt, and so these, I guess there are a couple of cold related questions. One of your images, it looked like it was a tent with a stovepipe coming up the middle of it, and I'm wondering, is that what it looked like? Do you have a stove inside your tent, and also do you carry that on your bike?
Yep, that's exactly right. So for probably, I guess I did my first like winter biking trip in 1998. But then it wasn't until 2006 that I had that fat bikes even existed. So in 2006 is kind of when I really got into it. And I just kind of copied and pasted everything I'd learned from winter mountaineering onto the bike template. And so the camps were cold. So I, you know, had a good sleeping bag and a tent, but an MSR, you know, whisper light kind of stove, and it's brutal. You know, when it's 30 below at night, what I would do in those days is sleep with a vapor barrier liner inside my sleeping bag, so the sweat from perspiration at night didn't corrupt the down my bag. But so you have to wake up in the morning and take this, you know, clammy vapor barrier off. You know, you're naked, and then you got to get all your clothes on as fast as you can. And no matter what you do, there's always condensation and moisture that then freezes. So these, you know, the first half a dozen big, you know, winter fat bike trips, anytime we would get to a village or a checkpoint or, you know, a cabin, we would feel desperate. And I really don't like that. You know, we feel desperate to come inside to, you know, dry everything out and to, you know, get, you know, dry again. But Dick Griffith really, you know, inspired me. You know, he has, you know, skied, you know, as much of Alaska as we have, but then he continued on and, you know, skied the entire Northwest Passage. And he came to the same conclusion that camping without a wood stove is miserable. And so he sewed a little stove jack into his tent and had like a little Yukon stove, but he's dragging a sled. And so that's that's too big of a thing for us to carry. But thankfully we found this company called Titanium Goat, which has unfortunately gone out of business. But they make a collapsible titanium wood stove. So the chimney rolls up against itself. So if it's vertical this way, you roll it up this way. So it ends up being, like 1 inch diameter and 6 inches long. The whole thing weighs like 1.5 pounds. It's really light and really durable. And so we, I sewed the little stovepipe jack into that shelter. and it just completely changed our world. It's gone from being miserable, cold, and desperate to warm, relaxed, and refreshed. You know, we start out each morning getting the fire going, starting our, morning coffee. That's the only stove that we bring. So we do all our water making and cooking on it. By the time you've had your coffee, all the moisture has gone out of your sleeping bag. The entire inside of the shelter, all the hoarfrost from that night has evaporated. And then the greatest joy of all is the whole thing is a great joy. But the last one, the icing on the on top, is that when we're breaking down camp, we pour the coals out on the ground, collapse the stove, put all the gear away. And then before we hit the trail, we get to go warm up our hands one last time over those embers before putting them in our mittens and starting the day. So it's just, I will never go back to the previous, paradigm. Like, yeah, the wood stove is awesome.
And then you just collect wood from your camp area, and it's dry because it's so freaking cold, right? Is that how that works?
What we always prefer, if we can find it, is willow patches. And within willow patches, you can almost always find dry, dead branches within. And so that's the right diameter, and they burn really well. But yeah, so that camp selection has become a big part of how we strategize, but we've gone all the way across the Arctic. The one place recently that I tried to bike was across the North Slope on this, they call it the Seawat Trail, that gets put in by the North Slope Borough between Dead Horse and Barrow. And there's absolutely nothing out there. So that was the one time recently that I did have to go back to the fuel stove. But otherwise, every trip we've done in Alaska, we've always been able to find wood, including in the high Arctic. And then in the summer, we just don't bring a stove at all. We just cook on open fires. And so all of our, summer Arctic expeditions, we've been able to find driftwood and primarily burn driftwood.
Oh, that's interesting. If you don't mind, I have a couple more questions. I don't want to dominate the conversation, or I don't want to take from other folks with their questions, but be real quick. So then if you're burning wood, then you must vent your tent then, right? Because there has to be a flow.
It's a floorless shelter that we use. So venting is no problem. There's plenty of, air that moves through.
Okay. And then with your photo equipment and your filmmaking equipment, do you have a strategy for keeping your batteries from freezing up, or in keeping a charge in your batteries and that sort of thing?
For the winter trips, I just bring a bunch of batteries. I've played with bringing a little, block and a charger, but I found that having, 4 batteries, and the Canon batteries, I'm really impressed. For the longest time, I shot with a Canon 5D Mark III, and I would have like 5 or 6 batteries that I'd bring with on the trip. And most of these, especially the winter trips, we're never more than 5 to 7 days away from the next village. And so, I've yet to run into a problem where I've run out of batteries, but, certainly the cold, does shorten their battery life. And I can only assume that the temperature, because the camera is next to my body, on my back, and that my back always heats up. It doesn't matter if it's 30 below. When I take that fanny pack off at the end of the day, I'm sweating there. And so I would assume that some of my body heat does make it into there, which helps. And then having it be in the dry bag is really key for any of that condensation issue. And so that's one of the big lessons that I learned early on is, if you go inside with the camera, leave it in the dry bag until it's completely come up to temperature. Otherwise, it'll fog up all of the entire lens and even the sensor. So it's like, yeah, leave it. Now, often if I'm just going to go in for, 5 minutes or whatever, I just leave the camera outside in the fanny pack rather than mess with that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Great images and great stories. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I see somebody's got a hand up. Is that Vivian?
Yes, hello. So this is kind of a question that hits me a little bit personally. I was trying to take a picture of like a little armadillo down in Florida, and my camera zoomed wrong. It zoomed in on some like leaves, and it was the only time it had put his he had put like his little head up. So that was terrible. So I was wondering, do you deal a lot with like missing out on a shot that you thought would be like really, really fantastic? And if so, how do you move on from that disappointment?
Great question. I don't move on. I brood. I'm a brooder.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's how I'm feeling right now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I found ages ago, there's a Facebook group that's called Crap Wildlife Photography. So that might be some redemption.
No, that I think I know that one. I think I know that one. Yeah. It's usually birds, it seems, I think.
Yeah. It's been a little while since I've seen it, but I thought that was a great premise for a Facebook group, because we all have them, you take a picture of the moose right as it, sticks its tongue out or, makes some stupid face or whatever,
Yeah, or just a bird actually like pooping on you or something.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly.
That's what comes to mind for me anyway.
Yep. Yeah. So one of the things that, I shoot in manual settings, and I've become a little OCD, which I'm not generally. But when I put my camera back in the fanny pack, I always remember my settings that I had, and then I'm trying, like if the light has changed or the clouds have, parted, or the, sun has come out or something has changed since the last photo I took, I try to keep that in my mind of what the last settings were. And then I try to anticipate what I'm going to need to change them to, really fast. And, like I try to be really fast with those things, and I'm like, whipping the camera around, I have this like pretty funny, it's a little routine that I've got of like how I get the camera around, in front of me, how I unzip it, unbuckle, and I always put it away in exactly the same way. So it comes out the same every time. And I always leave the camera on. I don't turn it off in between. Ages ago, somebody told me that every time you turn a digital camera off, it does the sensor cleaning. And then, if you haven't changed the lenses, you don't need to do that, but that is a draw on the battery. And I've never done a test. I've never, like actually found out if that is true or not, because I would assume that periodically when it's left on, I'm bumping it and it's probably, turning the LCD on. But anyway, that's the thing that I try to do in order to try to not miss this, the shot, something that happens really fast, is to, log in my head what the last settings were, and then what I might need to change them to get the next shot.
Oh, that's definitely something I never thought about doing, is just keeping the camera on.
Yeah.
I'd have to test to see how long my battery would last if I just have it like just sitting on. I feel like in the winter time that would probably drain the battery for sure, but
I've found that it's like days and days, of, if it's just, like, yeah, I mean, I get many days out of a battery with leaving the camera on, and then going to use it. So I don't think that it is, I feel like the advantage of having it be at the ready faster is more important than, even if it does end up being that I'm draining the battery faster. But I don't actually think that I am draining the battery faster. But I should actually find the answer out to that question. But anyway, that's just what I do. Yeah.
really good advice. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I'll try not to be so mad about the shots.
Yeah, I'm sorry though. It's yeah.
It's hard to get over it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for attending.
Jay, I think, has a question. Do you want to go ahead, Jay?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is relevant, but you do travel on a fat bike on the adventures on the wilderness, and I hear on your explanation you sometimes carry like stove, like a miniature stove and a tent, and you're traveling how many days, and how do you keep your bundle so tiny? Like I see your pictures and just a fat bike just in the back, you just have a small bundle, and you seem to like take a lot of photography, like videography, and like you need a lot of stuff, you know, like different lenses for different stuff, a battery pack, camera, you know, maybe tripod and stove and tent and sleeping bag. So many stuff to consider. How do you keep it so tiny?
It's taken a bit of time, but that is certainly always the goal, is how to keep the kit as minimal without sacrificing any of the necessary things. So our shelter is a floorless shelter made out of it's called sil nylon. It's very thin nylon. It weighs 2 pounds, and it goes into a, you can pack it into a 2 fist size package. Our sleeping bags are bulky, but they're not heavy. They're down sleeping bags. We do have to carry 2 sleeping pads, one foam pad and one lightweight air pad. The clothing that we wear, the layers, but a lot of that is light. Like the down parka and the down pants are very light. And then what we prefer to do is never carry more than a week's worth of food at a time. We've done several, summer trips where we're out longer and we need to carry more. So we've carried up to 2 weeks worth of food. But that is kind of burdensome. We have to really, the bike becomes heavy at that point. But a lot of the winter trips, we are able to resupply. We send flat rate boxes of food to the villages that we're going to be passing through. So typically we only have to carry 5, 6, 7 days of food at a time. And yeah, we just have really the kind of the discipline that I kind of learned this from first was alpine, mountaineering, mountain climbing. They call it alpine style of packing very light, but having just the right amount of stuff. And we really do. We are not deprived. We bring really nutrient dense food. We bring coffee. We have a few little creature comforts. Not really though. The creature comforts are pretty minor. I usually do bring like a paperback book, but yeah, it's kind of remarkable that you can get everything down to that lightweight size. And then the camera is this luxury. Most other people that do these trips don't mess with a full frame mirrorless or DSLR camera because they are so big. But for me, it is important to document, and it's a sacrifice that I'm willing, a weight penalty that I'm kind of happy to pay. And that fanny pack that I showed in that first slide has really been the secret for me to be able to carry it in a way that I feel it is secure. I'm not worried about it. Like if it was on some bag on my bike, I would be kind of a little more nervous about it. But when it's on my body, I'm part of the, its armor, of, getting smashed around. And yeah, it's just work. But it is a bummer when I'm trying to make a film because I would like to be able to bring better audio recording equipment. And I would, sometimes I have brought a lightweight tripod, but then that starts to become, burdensome, the weight and the size of it. So typically what I bring is the DSLR or the, whatever, now I'm shooting mirrorless. One telephoto lens, 24 to 105, I've found is kind of this pretty, it's, I'm often like wishing I had a longer lens, or sometimes wish I had a macro or whatever, but I just have to accept that that's all I'm going to carry. And then, so if I'm doing a film project, that camera, hybrid camera that shoots video as well, I'll bring a monopod, and then I'll just bring a cold shoe mic, like I'm trying to blank on the name, a shotgun mic that just plug into the little 1/8 jack. So it's not great audio, and so those films kind of suffer an aesthetic, especially in audio. They take a hit for that, and it's something that bothers me. I would like to figure out how to improve that, to be able to get to capture better audio when I'm on these wilderness trips. My professional kit that I have, I've got a cinema camera and good mics and lav mics and just mountain of gear, but I really only use that stuff when I'm working on a film project and not on these human powered trips. I wish that I could.
It's interesting because how you keep your sack really tiny, and your clothing's of course is like prone to condensations or somewhat, and your gear needs to be kind of like safe from also condensation. That's kind of like a danger out there.
Yes.
Do you carry like a backup plan?
Well, that dry bag that I keep the camera in is just so crucial to the whole kit. For protecting it from the condensation, worst case scenario, falling into open water or overflow or whatever. I really trust that dry bag, and I'm very particular about what kind of dry bag I use. The new lightweight ones are a no-go. I need the kind of thicker, beefier, very reliable dry bag. And I periodically, if we're on a really long trip, I will check it. I'll hold it up to the light to see if there's, to the sun, to see if there's any wear spots. Because I actually, on a sea kayak trip, had brought a take apart shotgun, and didn't check the dry bag for like a week, only to realize that it had a small pinhole leak, and the shotgun I had to throw it away. It just rusted, terribly. So I'm real cautious, about keeping up on checking, that the dry bag is working good.
And
But
dry bags are like waterproof bags. It also prevents from condensation as well.
Yeah.
But that's really cool.
Yeah. I highly recommend it for people, shooting in the winter, because the condensation issue can be a big one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a few questions in chat.
Oh, I didn't pay attention.
Somebody, let's see. Margaret says, do you keep your batteries inside your coat?
No, I keep them also. I have another dry bag that has them in them. I haven't there's a company in Homer called Nomar. They're a sewing company, and for the longest time they had this weldable dry bag material, and it was so awesome because you could buy it by the yard, this material, and you could make your dry bag into whatever shape you wanted, and then you iron it to itself. So you fold it to itself, and then iron the edges, and then it became waterproof. So you could make custom dry bags. And so the best dry bag that I ever had for my batteries was a tube, and that opened on both ends with a little ladder lock, and it one side was full and the other side was empty. So I would always know, when I was putting taking a new battery out, I knew that it was from the fresh side, and then I would put the the dead battery on the other side, and so it would constantly be cycling through. And I also just keep that in the same fanny pack, so the batteries are in their own dry bag.
Wow, that's cool. There's another question. What boots do you wear in the winter?
So the boot system that we use kind of has like 4 components to it. So the first component is like a super thin smart wool liner sock. Then we wear knee-high vapor barrier socks that don't allow any of the perspiration from your sweating feet into the boot. And it's a pretty, it sounds terrible, but it's actually amazing. You sweat to the point of saturation and no more. So, which is to say that, at the end of the day, when you take that sock off, you're not drained, it's not like buckets of water coming out of that. So, all day long, your feet are clammy in those, but you're preserving the insulation of the boot and of your other socks. So there's the smart wool liner sock, then the vapor barrier sock that comes up to our knee, then a thick sock, and then a felt boot, like Lobin's is a brand that we've used quite a bit. And then over that, we call them the white man mucklucks. They're the Neo overboots. So they're waterproof boots that also are knee high. And so no moisture can get in from the outside, and often on those winter trips, you do have to deal with overflow. And then no moisture is coming from, perspiration into the socks and the felt boot. So the thicker socks, you don't have to bring multiple pairs, because that one pair never gets, corrupted with sweat. And so again, this is such a great thing about having that little wood stove in our shelter. Once all the camp chores are done and we're inside the shelter and the fire is going in the stove, you take the vapor barrier sock off, you hang it up, all the moisture goes out of it. You take your liner sock off, all the moisture goes out of it. And then the next morning you put it back on, and it's, the liner socks get a little crusty by the end of the trip, but you start out every morning with dry socks. Again, works amazingly well. And we've been in some, pretty cold conditions, like, 40 below. And, and then one of the last things, that we have as a final, kind of insurance, and it's happened to me a couple of times with that setup. It's pretty rare, but where, I feel like, like I'm starting to feel dangerously cold, I'll crack the chemical hand warmer things and put them in the outer, the overboot. So it's just, real quick to open up the overboot, slide that in by your toes, close that boot back up, and then, the problem is abated.
Yeah. Great.
And there's a time lapse trick and shooting in winter that I learned several years ago that maybe some of you would be interested in hearing. So the normal hand warmers, those chemical hand warmers, they're porous on all sides. And I don't know if you've experienced this with them, but if you crack those, shake them a little bit, then you put them again, inside your mitten or whatever, and then they work. But if you just leave them out to the elements, they don't. They stay cold. But there are the more expensive foot warmers that have a sticker on the back of them, and they're bigger, and those work regardless of, if they're inside or outside. And so I was trying to shoot, I can't remember if it was Aurora, I was doing a time lapse at night in the winter, and tried the hand warmers at first. That didn't work, but then I tried that foot warmer, and I used the sticky to, put it against the bottom of my camera near where the battery pack was, and, got hours, out of the battery. Whereas, before, doing that, the interval shooting, that, it would go dead in, half hour, 45 minutes. So that I thought that was a pretty cool trick. The foot warmers work for, sticking onto your camera in really cold conditions.
Yeah, good to know. What else do we have question wise? How do you pick your trips?
Oh yeah, I actually was just writing about this the other day for an article. We, been I guess there's a series of criteria. There's like covering a lot of ground has appeal, and sometimes that ends up making not, if like that's the only criteria, sometimes, and that doesn't necessarily make the most interesting trip. Sometimes the trips, they're really kind of like guided by, what the terrain will allow. So especially the summer trips, when we're doing summer, completely wilderness trips, they have to be, somewhat bikeable, and we've had some, some catastrophic failures in that department of, trying to do things that really just aren't reasonable with a bike. But the winter trips, what's so amazing about Alaska, and I'm sure, many of you have spent time in rural Alaska, is that this time of year is just the best. The Iditarod goes through, and all of that, whole world opens up, and, everybody in those villages start traveling between one another on that trail. But that's just one example. They're all over. There's the Kobuk 440. There's the Kuskokwim. There's Copper, Basin. So all these places where there are dog mushing or snow machine events, or where there are villages close together, these like spider web of trail networks open up. And so, part of this, every time we do one trip, we kind of are made aware of other ways that people go, and other, usually they're, very historic, ancient, routes. So that's the winter, philosophy, is kind of like going where the locals go. And then summertime, it's, scouring Google Earth and looking for interesting places to go that, you kind of think may or may not work. Mm-hmm. And, inspire, and also too, like with those summer trips too, you start out, and as you're going, you find other valley systems or other, ridge networks or mountain ranges that you think you might try. So like the Seward Peninsula is a place where every time we go do a trip on the Seward Peninsula, we kind of realize, oh, there's more, that we can do. Yeah, I love the Seward Peninsula.
That's great. Somebody else asked, where can we watch this recording? And I can answer that. Alaska Photographic Center has a YouTube channel, and we have archived all of our recent, the last year and a half or 2 years, I think. There's at least, I don't know how many recordings of different lectures that you guys can watch if you go to YouTube and type in Alaska Photographic Center. So Bjorn, yours will be on that channel as well, and anybody's free to share it. So just so you know, I don't know, Seth Kantner is probably not on yet, but he lectured last week, and he made a joke about you. I forgot what it was though. He said, "Don't tell Bjorn that," or something like that, because he knew you were up next.
I think he said, "Don't trust anything I say."
Oh yeah, that was it. So, and can I quickly make an announcement that I forgot to announce early, and that Jenny Irene Miller is going to be our next presenter next month. And actually, Jenny's going to be presenting from Homer. She's doing a residency at Bunnell Street Art Center. So, so she's great. She's actually, her family's from the Seward Peninsula, Wales, but made great photography. I just wanted to plug that. And also to everybody, I follow Bjorn on Instagram. And if you want to also, it's at Fat Bike Bjorn. And I, you know, I enjoy seeing your adventures and also your, you know, thoughts on conservation and also food. You didn't really talk about food too much, but I know that through your Instagram, I know that you do, I don't know, I don't want to call it a diet or anything, but sort of a paleo sort of diet, for lack of
I'm trying to eat the way all Alaskans ate before colonization.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Yeah, a carnivore diet.
Carnivore diet. So anyway, there's a lot of great info or you know, you can keep up with Bjorn on his Instagram site. How many more questions do you have in you, Bjorn?
Oh, I'm happy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see Margaret's hand is up. Margaret, do you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. So I was curious, you mentioned making the switch over to mirrorless. And I have a kind of a clunky old, it's a D750 Nikon, and sometimes I don't bring it pack rafting and doing other stuff like that because it's so heavy. So I know I'm well versed in some of the positives to making the switch to mirrorless, but I'm curious if there were any downsides to that.
Well, it took me a minute to get used to when I look through the viewfinder and not having the mirrors, that's kind of a bummer. It just took me a minute to kind of like adjust to that image isn't the sharp image that I'm used to seeing. There's something strange about the autofocus that I just can't tell if I'm just being an idiot and I can't figure it out, but it'll kind of bump and change itself. And so I'm always having to check the LCD to make sure it is centered or where I want it to be. That was more finicky than it was on my Canon, my Mark III or my 5D. But I think it was, I can't tell you how heartbreaking it was for me to give up the 5D. Like it felt like an extension of my body, like of any piece of equipment that I have just cherished and loved and just had with me everywhere for so many years. I felt like it was a betrayal, to upgrade. But that aside, the benefits of this R5 are pretty awesome. One of the things, so I haven't upgraded my glass, so I'm still using my what is it, the L glass, and so I have an adapter, and it is this awesome adapter that has a variable ND filter in it. So for shooting video, I was always cheating, not following the filmmaker, rules of exposure with my DSLR before. So now I am able to, when I'm shooting video with the mirrorless, I'm able to have my shutter speed be twice the frame rate, which is what you're supposed to do, and then use the ND filter to, properly expose it. And so I really love that feature of it. And the other, there's a lot more programming that, I can do in this one. So, I have a whole bunch of presets that I can just kind of go to for, whether it's the, manual camera settings. And I, set those up so when I go to it, it's already at the settings that are generally, get me in the ballpark. So one button gets me to the general ballpark, and then I can, adjust as needed. And then, 24 frames a second, 60 frames a second, and 120 frames a second, video shooting in 4K, just like one button to just make it go to that. So I think the negative things that I have to say are really outweighed by all the positives of it. I'm really happy with it.
Okay,
so far.
thank you.
Yeah. Good luck. I hope that you find something that works for you.
Grace is asking, what are some trips that are on your wish list?
Well, we've tried to do the Kobuk 440 route twice, and that's starting to feel like I got a bone to pick. So the first time we tried it was in, I think, 2018, this time of year. Actually, yeah. It was this time of year. It was before that's the last, long distance dog mushing race of the season because it's so far north. And so we started this time of year, the first time, and we got to the village of Selawik and it started raining above the Arctic Circle. Oh, unbelievable. And, so just ruined the trail. And then we tried last winter and we went the other way. We went heading towards Ambler and got hammered by just epic dump of snow, and that crushed our dreams again. So I'd really like to do that route. It's so neat up there. I love the the kind of the Kobuk that whole kind of region. So that's something I would really like to do. And there are many, there are many, and they're getting to be many that I love so much, and it's been long enough that I would entertain going back and doing again. And we've done sections, done the whole Iditarod, but we've done sections of the Iditarod a couple times, and that the ride to McGrath is just awesome. I would do that every winter if I had the opportunity. And then the northern third or fourth, whatever, from Nome to Unalakleet is also so cool, or Unalakleet to Nome, whatever. But yeah, lots of trips. And I've never been out to the Aleutians at all. I assume that someday we'll do a big kayak trip out there. I've not been to the Aleutians at all, which feels like a sin.
I have another question to ask. This is Grace again. My partner and I, we have over the past few years started to explore the outdoors, and I'm a self-proclaimed indoor kitty cat, and he's very experienced in the outdoors. Would you say that your partner and you are pretty well yoked when it comes to outdoor adventures, or kind of what's that dynamic like?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell the story of when I knew that she was the one, which was like about a week after being together. She was an environmental education teacher with the Center for Alaskan Coastal Studies. So they do these spring outdoor ed programs with typically like junior high school age kids. She had a little break, just like 1 night, 2 days. And we took her in a double kayak. We kayaked from Homer Spit across the bay, climbed a ridge, hiked a ridge the next day, and then had to come down, make dinner, and then paddle back. And so I made this kind of a gut bomb of a meal. And as we were paddling, she's paddling just like a champion, like very little experience, and she just like heard, my little bits of advice and just took it. And she starts telling me, she's like, oh, my stomach kind of hurts, but she's still paddling. She's like, oh boy, my stomach really doesn't feel very good. She keeps paddling. She's like, I think I'm going to throw up. And she's still paddling. And then she stops paddling. She throws up, wipes her mouth, and then goes back to paddling. I was like, all right, this is a keeper. So to answer your question, we're very I wouldn't say, like, to say even would be unfair, because we both bring such different things to the experience, and we both completely have each other's backs. So there are times when, when I'm not feeling well, or, my attitude is bad or whatever, and she's the one that brings it up. And then that scenario, reverses. So we both really bring our own strengths to these experiences, and her background, of ecology has really, brought so much to these trips for me, and helped me kind of expand my thinking about the environment, the world that we're traveling through. It's so cool. And then she, her art form is nature journaling. And it's so cool, both of us will come back with our treasures, from the trips, and hers, these nature drawings, and with, little notes. And even, I would say, more so than my photographs or, video, those elicit, years later, a greater emotional memory of the experience, because she'll have had written some little reflection on, the day, the weather, the animals we saw, the interactions we had. So it's so cool. And there have been many times where we've, kind of collaborated on film projects where I'll, infuse her artwork into the film. So yeah, evenly matched, but it's not like, it's not the same ingredients. Each of us brings different ingredients to the trips.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Bjorn.
Yeah, I scored.
I have a question about bike travel. As a sort of amateur or whatever recreational fat biker myself, I find I'm always like inflating and deflating the tires. I guess you must do that a lot in your travels on different terrain, different trail conditions, right?
Yes. It's like, it's not as common as shifting gears, but it is the same mentality. You change your tire pressure as the conditions warrant. And if you're too obstinate, if you're like, oh, I'm going to just keep the, tire pressure high as the snow gets softer, you're just working harder, so you develop an intuition for when to let it out and when to put it back in. And yeah, so it's a constant part of, especially the winter trips, is changing the tire pressure. And that's why I'm willing to give tubeless another shake. And I used tubeless tires on my plus bike, but on the fat bike, I don't, because I'm changing my tire pressure all the time. I found that tubeless compound gets into the valve core, and it makes it difficult to let air out fast or to pump it back in. Like you get a little booger of that stuff stuck in the valve stem. And so I still run tubes in the winter, so I have that ability to quickly change, the tire pressure.
Oh, interesting. So that kind of leads into my next question. When I've gotten to a part of the trail that's just not rideable and I'm pushing the bike, I always wonder if I would have been better off on skis or just walking. And I wonder, is the bike the way to go as far as these long distance trips?
There, everything has its trade-off. So like, Dick Griffith doing his long, ski expeditions across Alaska that have been, wildly inspiring, to me. It takes him longer than it takes us. But he's he's so self-reliant. He's so able to get himself through whatever conditions come up by having a big sled with, weeks worth of food and his whole camp, and then skis that, can get him over, the worst drifts or the deepest snow, whatever it is. Even, you know, spring breakup, you know, he can keep going, you know, into those kind of conditions, or, you know, a skier can. Whereas the bike is limited, you know, like when the conditions are good or even decent, it's awesome. But, you know, we've been totally screwed, you know, on, you know, like I was saying with that Kobuk 440 trip, you know, if we were skiing, we could have in both of those situations continued on, but instead because we were on the bikes, we had to abandon. And, you know, so it's a gamble. And yeah, like it's, you know, that we've had so much good fortune, you know, it's you know, a good part of that is luck, you know. Like, you know, like we can be as in shape as we possibly can be and have all the right equipment, but, you know, the margin for error with the fat bike is less.
Yeah.
And,
There's
you know, I find it a little bit ironic, you know, that, you know, for the cover of the Wheels on Ice, I showed you that, you know, the photo of Kim pushing her bike over the Seward Peninsula, you know, so like the book that's, you know, about the 21st century or the 20th and 21st century, you know, bike expeditions in Alaska is a picture of not somebody riding a bike,
Yeah.
but pushing a bike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts on a bike too. It seems like there a lot more could go wrong.
Yeah, we really try to minimize the risk for that happening, but yeah, we can't.
Mm-hmm.
The risk, yeah, does exist.
How about we just take one more question? There's a lot of great comments in the chat, and Margaret asked if there's time for another question. Curious if you ever pull a pulk sled.
No, too much resistance.
No, not worth it, huh?
Yeah, that would, you know, I mean, if you were crossing like, you know, an icy lake or, you know, something like that, where you knew that it was going to be, you know, really good conditions, you didn't have far to go. But yeah, in general, like on a trail, it would be a lot of resistance, and you would lose your ability to stay afloat and ride efficiently. People in the, you know, especially in the 80s and 90s before fat bikes, you know, there was like the snowcat rims were made up in Fairbanks, and they were like the widest rims of, you know, for, you know, a couple decades. They were like 44 millimeters wide, and everybody that was riding winter trips was like experimenting with all these things, like putting a ski on the, you know, the, instead of having a front wheel, having a ski, or having like track things people were trying with, and dragging, you know, sleds and stuff. And everybody kind of just realized that simple is best, and what you really need is just wider, you know. So thankfully that now that technology is fully realized. And, you know, here's something I always think about it. I'm like super proud of this aspect, is that, you know, for the most part, Alaska is an importer of goods and concepts and, you know, modern, you know, culture. But, you know, the fat bike and the packraft are Alaskan inventions that then have been exported to the world. And, you know, they really have caught the, you know, the imagination of people all over the world. But, you know, it was like the Idita bike and the Idita sport that, you know, were what was driving people to think about, you know, having bikes with, you know, kind of like cartoonishly large, you know, tires. And so like Wildfire out of Palmer, you know, in the mid 2000s, they were making fat bikes, you know, before anybody. Roger Cowell's one of the first people that biked the Iditarod Trail, was welding multiple rims together on special like one-off hubs. So he would have 3 rims with 3 different tires. So, you know, by 1991 or 2, you know, he developed that. So, you know, the seed of fat bikes was absolutely an Alaska phenomenon. And now it's, you know, absolutely a global pursuit. You know, people ride fat bikes everywhere, and same with packrafts.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And I really appreciate all the awesome questions.
Yeah, same here. It's great to have you and to learn about your adventures and your photography and your filmmaking. I guess we'll call it good. And appreciate you again, Bjorn, and look for that. Look for the recording. I don't know. Sometimes it takes a couple weeks to a month before we get it posted, but yeah, thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you on April, I think it's 18th, but I'm not 100% sure, for Jenny Irene Miller, and you'll get your you can find out about it closer to the date through our website, akphotocenter.org, and be sure to think about submitting to Rarefied Light. Okay, folks, thanks again, Bjorn. We'll see you next time.
Good night, everybody. Thank you again.